Today, I'm taking you inside the secret rocket base where the Nazis invented space travel. Home to the most controversial science project of all time, this place ran on slave labor. But it also gave us the moon landing. It was Hitler's gift to NASA. But how did all this happen? It's a wild story of tragedy in Germany, terror in London, and a major in the Nazi SS who goes on to receive medals from President Eisenhower. And I've travelled to a remote location on the Baltic Sea to take you inside the buildings where it all went down. Look at this. I don't think I've ever been anywhere quite like this.
V2 was the war's deadliest weapon. It even killed the men who had spent their lives perfecting it.
Herr Wernher von Braun.
One small step for man.
It's the 1920s and a group of German scientists are obsessed with space. They're experimenting with gunpowder-propelled vehicles and writing fantastical literature about new theoretical machines that could one day leave our planet. They consult on the first sci-fi movies with astonishing accuracy, depicting vertical rocket launches with dramatic countdowns and multi-stage rocket deployments long before any of those things even existed. And they form a kind of club, not realizing that they're about to wade into history and steer the outcome of not only the coming war, but the one after that too. One of them is named Wernher von Braun. With his fascination for space, his engineering background, and a doctorate in physics, he's the young prodigy of the Rocket Club and personifies their obsessions and their potential. Together, they dream about making scenes like this a reality. They just need money, which is pretty convenient because the German army just needs a new type of weapon. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed strict caps on Germany's conventional military. It limited how many tanks they could have, it limited how many rifles and bullets and even soldiers they could have. But it didn't limit how many rocket weapons they could have, because rocket weapons didn't exist. So if these visionaries like Wernher von Braun could invent something with military applications, they could be the loophole to Germany remilitarizing and becoming competitive again. All the army needed to do was dump money into these guys' ideas and find somewhere top secret to put them when nobody would notice. And they chose right here, this location that I've come to show you where all of the innovation and all of the crimes against humanity played out. I'm in Peenemünde, a town on a tiny island on the edge of the Baltic Sea in the far northeast of Germany. 100 years ago, this was barely even a fishing village. It was a wide, flat, remote, unpopulated area right by the water, perfect for hiding your big, explosive experiments from prying eyes. In the 1930s, shortly after Hitler first became Chancellor, Germany set to work transforming these fields into this state-of-the-art complex with von Braun as its director and lead rocket designer. They built factories, laboratories, wind tunnels, army barracks, a railway to get around the whole thing, and even a huge on-site liquid oxygen plant designed to produce rocket fuel on an unprecedented industrial scale, all fueled by its own massive coal-fired power plant, which you can still walk around today. It's an eerie place where you can feel the weight of history, and it's difficult to constantly remind yourself that this is not a movie set. It's actually where thousands of people worked every day during the war. Here in these buildings, engineers could design a rocket component in the morning and have it machined on site on the same day. This concentration of resources and talent accelerated innovation like nobody had ever seen before. They experimented with different ideas and test launches, including this unmanned flying bomb, the V1, until hitting on this unmistakable design, the famous V2. When they test launched one of these in October 1942, it changed everything. They had sent the first ever man-made object into space. They celebrated and congratulated themselves. Today, the space age is born. A thin pretense that this was just a fun project to satisfy their childhood sci-fi ambitions. But they, of course, knew who was funding all this and what it would be used for. 3 years into the war, German cities were suffering gruesome Allied firebombing.
The RAF by night over Hamburg, the terror raining down from the skies. Down there is a pyrotechnic display the like of which has never before been seen.
A lust for vengeance had the Nazis intensely focused on inventing a new wonder weapon that could turn the tide. And with hindsight, yeah, that sounds like some kind of occult wishful thinking, but remember that the Americans did actually end up inventing a wonder weapon that helped them win the war. So these things weren't impossible. The V2's promise convinced Hitler to pour more and more resources into the project, and to grant von Braun the title of Major within the SS as a reward. But aside from the money, there was another cost involved in this process: the human cost. This immense level of construction and manufacturing required labour, which they sourced from nearby concentration camps. Thousands of indentured labourers and prisoners of war were brought here and forced to work in these buildings. Across this whole coastal region, I saw many memorials to them and reminders of the camps and the mistreatment. Educating about this injustice is one of the primary functions of these sites today. So von Braun's resume is already besmirched with forced labour at this point, and you're thinking, how on earth does this guy go on to receive honours from the US? But it gets worse. British intelligence had heard rumours of this place, of the rockets, of the camps, but they didn't believe it until sketches and rough maps were bravely smuggled out in 1943. Believing that they had to act fast to prevent Germany really obtaining a wonder weapon, 600 RAF bombers attacked Peenemünde and the surrounding area.
As Mr. Churchill said, V2 is finished thanks to the RAF and the British Army.
But the intel was flawed and the raid was inaccurate. Infrastructure buildings like this were hit, but barely enough to delay the lab's work by a couple of months, and hundreds of people were killed, but these were mostly the enslaved workers. Von Braun himself survived in a nearby air raid shelter. Aside from the huge cost of innocent life, the main impact of Britain's raid was informing Germany that Peenemünde was a compromised location. This prompted them to move production underground. They established a new facility inside a mountain in central Germany with even worse conditions. Over 10,000 concentration camp prisoners were literally worked to death building V2 components in underground tunnels. If they survived the non-stop work and the starvation, they wouldn't survive the rampant disease outbreaks or the prisoner executions. Von Braun personally visited that facility 15 times and directly oversaw the transportation of new prisoners from camps like Auschwitz to maintain its population. In September 1944, just 8 months before the end of the war, the first V2 rocket was fired at London, landing near Chiswick and killing 3 people. But overall, it was surprisingly ineffective considering the required materials. Attacking from space at the speed of sound is scientifically impressive, but militarily, it was grossly inefficient. Its inaccuracy and randomness partly did contribute to the psychological terror in Antwerp and in London during the Blitz, but it never killed as many people as the Nazis had hoped for. In fact, more people died manufacturing the V2 than it ever actually killed in combat. So the V2 doesn't turn the tide. Germany loses and the Russians are advancing. Von Braun grabs his blueprints and flees west to surrender to the Americans. But they don't put him on trial as a war criminal. They employ him. Von Braun becomes the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. He gets American citizenship. He sells JFK a dream that they would go to the moon in this decade or the next. He makes a few cute educational movies with Walt Disney about spaceflight.
This is a section that must ultimately return the men to the Earth safely.
And him and his team iterate on their rocket designs, going through the stages until they have this, the Saturn V. It's a distant but direct descendant of this V2 from Peenemünde, much bigger and improving on what they learned during the Nazi days. And it carries Neil Armstrong to the moon, defeating the Russians in the Cold War space race. According to Apollo director Samuel C. Phillips, this was something that they never could have achieved without Wernher von Braun. Von Braun himself was given the President's Award for Distinguished Civilian Service by President Eisenhower, and later the National Medal of Science by President Ford, to hang alongside the War Merit Cross given to him by Hitler. And he wasn't the only one. Under Operation Paperclip, 100 engineers that were once employed in these buildings went on to work for NASA, including the first ever head of the Kennedy Space Center. And NASA don't even shy away from it, with their own website describing von Braun as well aware of the terrible conditions in the camp and involved in decision-making about the use of slave labor. You couldn't even enter his office without being reminded of the lineage between the V2 and the bigger Nazi rockets. The US cast itself as liberator, ending the horrors of the war. But its crowning post-war achievement directly attaches some of those same horrors onto its own history. It reminds us of the need to consider every nation's past complexly, and it all started right here, in a creepy factory next to the Baltic Sea. Use the links in the description to plan your own trip here, subscribe to keep up with all my new travel history deep dives, and click here to watch this one next.